The Jerusalem Bible, Leviticus chapter 6. Yahweh spoke to Moses and said, "Give these orders to Aaron and his sons. This is the ritual for the burnt offering, that is, the burnt offering that stays on the altar brazier all night until morning, and is consumed by the altar fire. The priest will put on his linen tunic and put on his linen drawers on to cover himself. He will then remove the fatty ashes of the burnt offering consumed by the altar fire and put them at the side of the altar. He will then take off his clothes, put on others, and carry the ashes to a clean place outside the camp. The fire on the altar that consumes the burnt offering must not be allowed to go out. Every morning the priest will make it up with wood, arranging the burnt offering on it and burning the fat from the communion sacrifices. The fire must always be burning on the altar. It must never go out. This is the ritual of the cereal offering. One of the descendants of Aaron will bring it into Yahweh's presence in front of the altar. Will take a handful of the wheaten flour with the oil and all the incense which has been added to it, and burn the memorial on the altar as a smell pleasing to Yahweh. And Aaron and his sons will eat the remainder in the form of unleavened cakes. They will eat it inside the holy place, in the court of the tent of meeting. The portion I give them of the food burnt for me must not be baked with leaven. It is especially holy, like the sacrifices for sin and the sacrifice for reparation. All male descendants of Aaron are entitled to eat this portion of the food burnt for Yahweh. This is a perpetual law for all your descendants, and anyone who touches it will become holy." Yahweh spoke to Moses and said, "This is the offering that Aaron and his sons must make to Yahweh on the day they are anointed: 1/10 of an ephah of wheaten flour as a perpetual cereal offering, half in the morning and half in the evening. It will be prepared on the griddle and mixed with oil. You will bring the paste as a cereal offering in several pieces, offering them as a smell pleasing to Yahweh. When one of his sons is anointed priest to succeed him, he will do the same. This is a perpetual law. The entire cereal offering will be burnt for Yahweh. Every cereal offering made by a priest will be a total sacrifice. None of it will be eaten." Yahweh spoke to Moses and said, "Speak to Aaron and his sons and say, 'This is a ritual for the sacrifice for sin. The victim must be slaughtered before Yahweh on the spot where the burnt offerings are slaughtered. It is especially holy. The priest who offers the sacrifice will eat it. It will be eaten inside the holy place, in the court of the tent of meeting. Everything touching the victim's meat will become holy, and if any of the blood splashes on clothing, the stain will be washed off inside the holy place. The earthenware vessel in which the meat is cooked must be broken. If a bronze vessel has been used for the cooking, it must be scrubbed and thoroughly rinsed with water. Any male who is a priest may eat the sacrifice. It is especially holy. But no one may eat any of the victims offered for sin, the blood of which has been taken into the tent of meeting to make a expiation inside the sanctuary. These must be burnt." The Jerusalem Bible, Leviticus chapter 7. This is the ritual for the sacrifice of reparation. It is especially holy. The victim must be slaughtered where the burnt offerings are slaughtered, and the priest will pour the blood all around the altar. He will then offer all the fat, the tail, the fat covering the entrails, both kidneys, the fat on them and on the loins, the mass of fat which he will remove from the liver and kidneys. The priest will burn these pieces on the altar as food burnt for Yahweh. This is a sacrifice of reparation. Every male who is a priest may eat it. It will be eaten inside the holy place. It is especially holy. As with the sacrifice for sin, so with the sacrifice of reparation. The ritual is the same for both. The offering with which the priest performs the rite of expiation will revert to the priest. The hide of the victim presented by someone to the priest to be offered as a burnt offering will revert to the priest. Every cereal offering baked in the oven, every cereal offering cooked in the pan or on the griddle will revert to the priest who offers it. Every cereal offering, mixed with oil or dry, will revert to all the descendants of Aaron without distinction. This is the ritual for the communion sacrifice to be offered to Yahweh. If this is offered as a sacrifice with praise, to the latter must be added an offering of unleavened cakes mixed with oil, unleavened wafers spread with oil, and wheaten flour in the form of cakes mixed with oil. The offering then must be added to the cakes of leavened bread, and to the communion sacrifice with praise. One of the cakes of this offering must be presented as an offering to Yahweh. It will revert to the priest who pours out the blood of the communion sacrifice. The meat of the victim will be eaten on the day the offering is made. Nothing may be left until next morning. If the victim is offered as a votive or voluntary sacrifice, it must be eaten on the day it is offered, and the remainder may be eaten on the following day. But on the third day, whatever is left of the meat of the victim must be burnt. If any of the meat of the victim offered as a communion sacrifice is eaten on the third day, the person who has offered it will not be acceptable and would receive no credit for it. It will count as rotten meat, and the person who eats it will bear the consequences of the guilt. Meat that has touched anything unclean cannot be eaten. It must be burnt. Anyone clean may eat the meat, but anyone unclean who eats the meat of a communion sacrifice offered to Yahweh will be outlawed from his people. Furthermore, if anyone touches anything unclean, human or animal, or any foul thing, and then eats the meat of the communion sacrifice offered to Yahweh, that individual will be outlawed from his people. Yahweh spoke to Moses and said, "Speak to the Israelites and say, you may not eat the fat of ox, sheep, or goat. The fat of an animal that has died a natural death or been savaged by beast may be used for any other purpose, but you are not to eat it. Anyone who eats the fat of an animal offered as food burnt for Yahweh will be outlawed from his people. Wherever you live, you will never eat blood, whether it be of a bird or a beast. Anyone who eats any blood will be outlawed from his people." Yahweh spoke to Moses and said, "Speak to the Israelites and say, anyone who offers Yahweh a communion sacrifice must bring him part of his sacrifice as an offering. He must bring the food to be burnt for Yahweh. This is to say, the fat adhering to the forequarters with his own hands. He will bring it, and also the forequarters, with which he will make the gesture of offering before Yahweh. The priest will then burn the fat on the altar, and the forequarters will revert to Aaron and his descendants. You will set aside the right thigh from your communion sacrifice and give it to the priest. The high thigh will be a portion of the descendants of Aaron, who offers the blood and the fat of the communion sacrifice. For I have deprived the Israelites of the forequarters offered, and the thigh presented in their communion sacrifices, and given them to the priest Aaron and his descendants. This is a perpetual law for the Israelites. Such was the portion of Aaron and his descendants in the food burnt for Yahweh, the day he presented them to Yahweh for them to become his priest. This is what Yahweh ordered the Israelites to give them on the day they were anointed, a perpetual law for all their descendants. Such was the ritual for burnt offering, cereal offering, sacrifice for sin, sacrifice for reparation, investiture sacrifice, and communion sacrifice, which Yahweh laid down for Moses on Mount Sinai, the day he ordered the Israelites to make their offerings to Yahweh in the desert of Sinai. The Jerusalem Bible, Leviticus chapter 8. Yahweh spoke to Moses and said, Take Aaron and with him his sons, the vestments, the anointing oil, the bull for the sacrifice for sin, the 2 rams, and the basket of unleavened bread. Then call the whole community together at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Moses did as Yahweh ordered. The community gathered at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and Moses said to them, This is what Yahweh has ordered to be done. He made Aaron and his sons come forward, and washed them with water. He then dressed him in the tunic, passed the waistband round his waist, vested him in the robe, and put the ephod on him. He then put the waistband of the ephod round his waist, fastening it to him. He put the breastplate on him, and placed the Urim and Thummim in it. He put the turban on his head, and on the front of the turban the golden flower. This was a symbol of holy consecration, which Yahweh had prescribed to Moses. Moses then took the anointing oil and anointed the dwelling and everything inside it, to consecrate them. He sprinkled the altar 7 times, and anointed the altar and its accessories, the basin and its stand, to consecrate them. He then poured some of the anointing oil on Aaron's head, and anointed him to consecrate him. Moses then made Aaron's sons come forward. He dressed them in tunics, passed the waistbands round their waist, and put on their headdresses as Yahweh had ordered him. He then had the bull for the sacrifice for sin brought forward. Aaron and his sons laid their hands on the victim's head, and Moses slaughtered it. He then took the blood, and with his finger put some of it on the horns of the corners of the altar, to purify the altar. He then poured the rest of the blood at the foot of the altar, when he consecrated by performing the rite of expiation over it. He then took all the fat covering the entrails, the mass of fat over the liver, both kidneys and their fat, and he burnt this on the altar. But the bull's skin, its meat and its offal, he burnt outside the camp, as Yahweh had ordered Moses. He then had the ram for the burnt offering brought forward. Aaron and his sons laid their hands on the ram's head, and Moses slaughtered it. He poured its blood all around the altar. He then quartered the ram, and burned the head, the quarters, and the fat. He then washed the entrails and shins, and burnt the whole ram on the altar, as a burnt offering, offered to be a pleasing smell, as food burnt for Yahweh, as Yahweh had ordered Moses. He then had the other ram brought forward, the ram for the investiture sacrifice. Aaron and his sons laid their hands on its head, and Moses slaughtered it. He took some of its blood and put it on the lobe of Aaron's right ear, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. He then made Aaron's sons come forward, and he put some of the blood on the lobes of their right ears, on the thumbs of their right hands, and on the big toes of their right feet. Next, Moses poured the rest of the blood all around the altar. He then took the fat, the tail, and all the fat covering the entrails, the mass of fat over the liver, both kidneys and their fat, and the right thigh. From the basket of unleavened bread placed before Yahweh, he took an unleavened cake, a cake of bread made with oil, and a wafer. He placed these on the fat and the right thigh, and put it all into Aaron's hands, and those of his sons, and made the gesture of offering before Yahweh. Moses then took them away from them, and burned them on the altar with the burnt offering. This was the investiture sacrifice, offered to be a pleasing smell, as food burnt for Yahweh. Moses then took the forequarter, and made the gesture of offering before Yahweh. This was the portion of the ram of investiture that reverted to Moses, as Yahweh had ordered Moses. Moses then took some of the anointing oil and some of the blood that was on the altar, and sprinkled Aaron and his vestments, and his sons and their vestments with it. In this way he consecrated Aaron and his vestments, and his sons and their vestments. Moses then said to Aaron and his sons, "Cook the meat at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and eat it there, as also the bread of the investiture sacrificed still in the basket of the investiture offerings, as I ordered, when I said Aaron and his sons must eat it. What remains of the meat and bread you will burn. For 7 days you will not leave the entrance of the tent of meeting, until the time of your investiture is complete. For your investiture will require 7 days. Yahweh has ordered us to do as we have done today, to perform the rite of expiation for you. Hence for 7 days, day and night, you will remain at the entrance of the tent of meeting, observing Yahweh's ritual. But this, and you will do, will not incur death. For this was the order I received." So Aaron and his sons did everything that Yahweh had ordered through Moses. The Jerusalem Bible, Jeremiah 7:21 through 8:3, and 9:22 through 23. Yahweh Sabaoth, the God of Israel, says this: "Add your burnt offerings to your sacrifice, and eat all the meat. For when I brought your ancestors out of Egypt, I said nothing to them, gave them no orders about burnt offerings or sacrifices. My one command to them was this: listen to my voice. Then I will be your God, and you shall be my people. In everything follow the way that I mark out for you, and you shall prosper." But they did not listen. They did not pay attention. They followed their own devices, their own stubborn and wicked inclinations, and came worse rather than better. From the day your ancestors left Egypt until today, I have sent you all my servants the prophets, persistently sending them day after day. But they have not listened to me, have not paid attention. They have deliberately resisted, behaving worse than their ancestors. So you will tell them all this, but they will not listen to you. You will call them, but they will not answer you. Then you ought to say to them, "This is the nation that will neither listen to the voice of Yahweh its God, or take correction. Sincerity is no more. It has vanished from their mouths. Cut off your tresses, throw them away. On the bare heights raise a dirge. For Yahweh has rejected, has abandoned a brood that enrages him. Yes, the people of Judah have done what displeases me, Yahweh declares. They have set up their horrors in the temple that bears my name to defile it, and have built the high places of Tophat in the valley of Ben-Hinnom, to burn their sons and daughters, a thing I never ordered, that had never entered my thoughts. So now the days are coming, Yahweh declares, when people will no longer say Tophet or valley of Ben-Hinnom, but valley of slaughter. Tophet will become a burial ground for lack of other space. The corpses of this people will be food for the birds of the sky and the animals of earth, and there will be no one to drive them off. I shall silence the shouts of rejoicing and mirth in the voices of the bridegroom and bride, the towns of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem, for the country will be reduced to desert. Chapter 8. When the time comes, Yahweh declares, the bones of the kings of Judah, the bones of its chief men, the bones of its priests, the bones of the prophets, and the bones of the inhabitants of Jerusalem will be taken from their tombs. They will be spread out before the sun, the moon, the whole array of heaven, whom they have loved and served, followed, consulted, and worshipped. They will not be gathered or rebuilt, or be reburied, but will be left laying on the surface like dung. The death will seem preferable to life to all the survivors of this wicked race, wherever I have driven them, Yahweh Sabaoth declares. You ought to tell them. Yahweh says this, if someone falls, can he not stand up again? If people stray, can they not turn back? Why does this people persist in acts of infidelity? Why does Jerusalem persist in continuous infidelity? They cling to illusion. They refuse to turn back. I have listened attentively. They have never said anything like that. Not one repents of wickedness, saying, what have I done? Each one keeps returning to the course like a horse charging into battle. Even the stork in the sky knows the appropriate season. Turtle dove, swallow, and crane observe their time of migration. But my people do not know Yahweh's laws. How can you say, we are wise, since we have Yahweh's law? Look how it has been falsified by the lying pen of the scribes. The wise are put to shame, alarmed, caught out because they have rejected Yahweh's word. What price their wisdom now? So I shall give their wives to other men, and their fields to new masters, for from the least to the greatest they are all greedy for gain, prophet no less than priest, and all them practice fraud. Without concern they dress the wound of the daughter of my people, saying, peace, peace, whereas there is no peace. They should be alarmed, and they should be ashamed of their loathsome deeds. Not they. They feel no shame. They do not even know how to blush. And so, as others fall, they too will fall, and be thrown down when the time of punishing them comes. Yahweh says. I shall put an end to them. Yahweh declares, no more grapes on the vine, no more figs on the fig tree, only withered leaves. I will found them, people to trample on them. Why are we sitting still? Mobilize, take to the fortified towns, and there fall silent, since Yahweh our God means to silence us by giving us poisoned water to drink, because we have sinned against him. We were hoping for peace. No good came of it. For the time of healing, nothing but terror. Chapter 9, verses 22 and 23. Yahweh says this, Let the sage not boast of wisdom, nor the valiant of valor, nor the wealthy of riches, but let anyone who wants to boast of this, of understanding and knowing me. For I am Yahweh, who acts with faithful love, justice, and uprightness on earth. Yes, these are what pleases me, Yahweh declares. The Jerusalem Bible, Hebrews 8, 1 through 6. The principal point of all that we have said is that we have a high priest of exactly this kind. He has taken his seat at the throne of divine majesty in the heavens, and he is the minister of the sanctuary and of the true tent which the Lord, and not any man, set up. Every high priest is constituted to offer gifts and sacrifices, and so the one, too, must have something to offer. In fact, if he were on earth, he would not be a priest at all, since there are others who make the offerings laid down by the law, though those maintain the service only of a model or a reflection of the heavenly realities, just as Moses, when he had the tent to build, was warned by God, who said, See that you work to the design that was shown you on the mountain. As it is, he was given a ministry as far superior as the covenant of which he is the mediator, which is founded on better promises.